King David, renowned for his victories and wisdom, faced a profound failure in one area that no one could have anticipated: his inability to protect his children. Despite being a king who conquered nations, defeated giants, and wrote psalms that still resonate today, David faltered as a father. This glaring failure is particularly evident in the tragic story of his daughter, Tamar, and his son, Amnon. The man who had a kingdom at his command and was known for his courage couldn't protect his own family. This is perhaps one of the most painful lessons we can learn from David's life. Even the most powerful and revered leaders can fail at home, especially when it comes to their responsibilities as parents. David's leadership on the battlefield was unmatched. He expanded the borders of Israel, made strategic decisions that ensured the nation's prosperity, and held wisdom that was sought after by kings and nations. However, when it came to his children, he seemed powerless. Unaware of the dangers within his own household, David had many children from different wives, which created a volatile family dynamic. Rivalries and jealousy naturally arose. But David, caught up in the demands of ruling a vast kingdom, failed to address these tensions. His focus was on the external world, while internally, his family was unraveling. The case of Tamar is the most heartbreaking example of this failure. Tamar was David's daughter, a young woman known for her beauty and virtue. Yet she became the victim of her half-brother Amnon's lust. Amnon, David's firstborn son, was consumed by an obsessive desire for Tamar, and instead of seeking help or guidance, he concocted a deceitful plan to manipulate his father and sister. David, in his wisdom and position of power, should have seen the signs of danger, yet he didn't act. When Tamar came to Amnon's aid, thinking she was simply fulfilling her duties as a sister, she unwittingly walked into a nightmare. Amnon raped her, and David, upon hearing of the crime, did nothing. His inaction, his silence, allowed the situation to escalate, creating an irreversible rift in the family. This failure of protection goes beyond mere neglect. David's silence in the face of his daughter's pain not only shattered Tamar's life, but also set the stage for future violence and revenge within the family. Absalom, Tamar's brother, harbored deep resentment toward Amnon for the crime, and when David failed to take action, Absalom's silence eventually led to his own violent revenge. The ripple effect of David's failure as a father reached far beyond the walls of his palace. It affected his children, his kingdom, and the entire course of Israel's future. David's story shows us that no amount of power can shield us from the responsibility of being present and vigilant in our families. His failure as a father serves as a stark reminder that even the strongest leaders can falter when they neglect their most important duties at home. The story of Tamar's tragic abuse stands as one of the darkest moments in King David's reign, and it highlights the consequences of inaction within a family. Tamar, the daughter of King David, was a young woman filled with virtue and grace. However, her life would be irreparably changed by her half-brother Amnon, the king's firstborn son. Amnon's obsession with Tamar grew to an unhealthy and twisted extent, leading him to craft a cruel and manipulative scheme to get what he wanted. This wasn't a case of normal sibling affection. Amnon's feelings for Tamar were nothing short of an obsessive lust, which led to one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. What is perhaps even more devastating than Amnon's crime is the fact that King David, the man who conquered nations and fought giants, despite his wisdom and the respect he commanded as king, David did not intervene when Tamar was violated. David heard about the crime, and his reaction was one of anger, but it was a hollow fury. There was no action taken. He simply stood by, offering no justice, no protection, and no comfort to his daughter in her moment of deepest pain. In this moment, David's silence was deafening. Tamar was left in a position of isolation, with no one to turn to for help. Her father, who's supposed to protect her, failed to take the necessary steps to ensure that justice was served. It's heartbreaking to think that a man who was so brave on the battlefield, who stood strong against giants and enemies, couldn't summon the courage to confront the wrongs within his own family. The lack of action allowed Tamar's suffering to fester, and her emotional and psychological trauma was left unaddressed. Tamar, for her part, demonstrated remarkable strength and courage in the face of her brother's cruelty. When Amnon made his advances, she tried to reason with him. She pleaded with him to respect the laws of Israel and protect her honor. In a desperate attempt to avoid what she knew would be a catastrophe, Tamar even suggested that Amnon seek the king's help. But her cries were ignored, and Amnon, driven by his obsession, proceeded to assault her. The aftermath was nothing short of devastating. Tamar, humiliated and broken, was cast aside like an object, left in despair. David's failure to act wasn't just a failure as a father, it was a failure as a leader. His silence in the face of such a crime sent a message that his daughter's well-being was not a priority, and it only served to deepen the emotional scars that would later drive Absalom, Tamar's brother, to revenge. This tragedy highlights the immense consequences of a leader's failure to protect their own family and serves as a timeless lesson about the need for vigilance, justice, and action in moments of crisis. David's silence in the face of Tamar's abuse is not just a tragic moment in the story, but a pivotal turning point that led to even greater consequences within his family. The king, known for his wisdom and leadership on the battlefield, showed a stark failure in his most important role as a father. When Tamar, his daughter, was violated by her half-brother Amnon, David's reaction was one of anger, but not one of action. He was furious when he heard the news of the assault, but he did nothing to protect his daughter, seek justice, or hold Amnon accountable for his crime. The consequences of this failure were far-reaching, not just for Tamar, but for the entire royal family. David's lack of action after Tamar's abuse speaks volumes about the complexity of leadership and the dangers of ignoring family issues. While he ruled with wisdom and strength over Israel, his silence in his own household laid the foundation for even more chaos and heartbreak. Tamar was left without support. She sought refuge with her brother Absalom, who took her in but could not undo the trauma she had suffered. Yet, Absalom's resentment toward Amnon for the crime against his sister began to grow as well. What's even more troubling about David's silence is that he had the power to do something. As king, he had the authority and resources to enact justice. The fact that he didn't take any action, whether out of fear, uncertainty, or a sense of guilt over his own past sins, demonstrates a dangerous failure in his leadership. Proverbs 21:15 reminds us that when justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to the wrongdoers. David, by failing to seek justice for Tamar, indirectly allowed the wrongdoers in his family to continue their destructive behavior. This inaction was not just a failure in parenting, it was a failure of leadership. David's role as the head of his family was to provide safety and protection for his children, but when Tamar needed her father most, David's leadership failed her. The silence in this moment proved to be more destructive than any act of violence. The absence of intervention from David allowed the cycle of hurt and vengeance to take root, and the impact was devastating. Absalom, Tamar's brother, harbored deep hatred toward Amnon for his crime, and in time, that hatred would lead to a tragic act of revenge. David's failure to act after the assault on Tamar reveals the importance of not only being vigilant in protecting those we love, but also being willing to confront difficult situations, even when they seem overwhelming. Silence, especially when it comes to protecting vulnerable members of the family, can lead to catastrophic consequences, as we see in the aftermath of David's inaction. It is a powerful reminder for all leaders whether in families, communities, or nations, that failing to act when injustice occurs only perpetuates harm. The consequences of King David's silence and failure to act were not just limited to Tamar's suffering. They sparked a chain of events that would shake the entire royal family and the kingdom of Israel. Absalom, Tamar's brother, was deeply affected by the injustice done to his sister. The betrayal he felt, not just from Amnon, but from his father David, who failed to bring justice, planted the seeds of vengeance in his heart. For 2 years, Absalom kept his feelings of anger and resentment hidden, but the silence within the royal household only fueled his desire for revenge. Absalom's response to the situation reveals how unaddressed injustices can lead to destructive outcomes. Instead of dealing with the problem directly, David's inaction created an environment where one of his own sons would take matters into his own hands. Absalom's silence about his hatred toward Amnon for the 2 years that followed the assault is a painful illustration of the consequences of David's failure to act as a father. Absalom waited patiently, carefully planning his revenge, and eventually he carried out his plot with ruthless precision. Absalom organized a sheep-shearing feast, an event that was typically celebrated with joy. This seemingly innocent gathering would turn into a deadly moment of reckoning. When David hesitated to attend the feast, Absalom insisted that Amnon, his older brother, should be there, even though Amnon's presence at the feast would likely have been a dangerous invitation. Absalom had no intention of letting the past go. At the feast, when Amnon was drunk, Absalom ordered his servants to kill him. The brutal murder of Amnon in that moment set off a wave of panic and fear throughout the palace, and David's family was once again torn apart. David, who had failed to act when Tamar was assaulted, now found himself facing the painful consequences of his inaction. His firstborn son, Amnon, was dead, and the remaining royal family members feared for their own safety. The kingdom, which David had worked so hard to build, was now in turmoil because of the failure to address issues within his own family. The seeds of violence had been sown, and the result was tragic. This story underscores the dangers of ignoring or delaying justice, particularly when it involves family. David, the wise and courageous king who defeated enemies on the battlefield, proved helpless in the face of the emotional and moral battles within his own home. His failure to act when it mattered most not only cost him his son Amnon, but also led to further division and violence within his family. The consequences of his silence reverberated far beyond his own household and forever changed the course of Israel's royal line. The story of King David's family is a powerful reminder of how hidden tensions and unresolved issues can gradually tear a family apart. Despite David's great success as a warrior and leader of Israel, he failed to maintain peace and unity within his own household. The royal palace, with its grand stone corridors and luxurious rooms, was filled with brothers and sisters from different mothers, each carrying their own ambitions and desires. David's multiple marriages and large family created a complex environment where rivalries, jealousy, and unresolved conflicts festered beneath the surface. These were the early signs of trouble that David failed to recognize and address. Amnon, David's firstborn son, held a special place in the royal family. As the eldest, he had significant influence, yet his feelings toward his half-sister Tamar were not those of a protective brother, but of a dangerous obsession. Tamar's beauty caught Amnon's attention, and instead of seeking counsel or understanding, his lust turned into a destructive desire. Amnon's actions, fueled by his unhealthy fixation, led to the tragedy that would shatter the family. This should have been a warning sign to David, but distracted by the demands of ruling an empire, he failed to see the growing tension within his household. The presence of Jonadab, Amnon's cousin and confidant, further exacerbated the situation. Jonadab, described as a very wise man, used his influence over Amnon to manipulate him into carrying out the horrific plan that ultimately led to Tamar's rape. Jonadab's cunning advice opened the door to a tragedy that could have been avoided if David had been more attentive to the dynamics within his family. Despite being a man known for his wisdom and sensitivity, especially seen in his psalms and devotion to God, David was blind to the peril within his own household. David's failure to step in and address the growing conflict between his children is not just an oversight, it's a cautionary tale for any leader, especially within the family. The Bible warns in Proverbs 22:3 that the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the naive go on and suffer the consequences. David's naivety, or perhaps his reluctance to address these issues head-on, allowed the animosities between his children to build unchecked. As a leader, David's responsibilities extended beyond the battlefield. He had to provide guidance, protection, and justice within his own family. His failure to do so set the stage for further betrayal and violence, ultimately leading to Amnon's death at the hands of Absalom and a kingdom plunged into chaos. The lesson here is clear. A leader must not only manage external affairs, but also be vigilant in the care and unity of his own household. Ignoring the warning signs of discord can lead to irreversible consequences, as it did for David and his family. David's failure as a father, especially in the case of Tamar's tragic abuse, was not just a momentary lapse in judgment, but part of a deeper pattern of neglect in his role as a parent and leader. Although David was known for his courage, wisdom, and divine favor as Israel's king, he struggled in his most important role, being a father to his children. His failure to protect Tamar from Amnon's assault was not just a single failure of action, but a symptom of broader issues in David's leadership within his own family. This failure was marked by a lack of vigilance, the inability to recognize warning signs, and a reluctance to confront the discomforting problems in his home. As a king, David had a keen ability to recognize threats from outside his kingdom. He could discern the strategies of his enemies and act swiftly to protect Israel. Yet, when it came to the dynamics within his own family, David seemed almost blind to the dangers. Tamar's assault was not an isolated incident, but part of a growing pattern of unresolved issues among his children. Amnon's unhealthy obsession with Tamar was not something that arose overnight. It had been building over time, and yet David failed to see the warning sign. A father who could conquer giants and defeat entire armies failed to recognize the emotional and moral turmoil brewing under his roof. The Bible tells us that David was a man after God's own heart, yet he was unable to bring the same spiritual sensitivity to his family's needs. As Proverbs 22:3 warns, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty." David, in his complacency or perhaps because of his own guilt over his past sins, failed to act when the signs of trouble were all around him. He didn't see the danger in Amnon's obsession with Tamar, the manipulation by Jonadab, or the increasing hostility among his sons. His passive leadership, both as a father and as a king, allowed these issues to fester unchecked. Another key aspect of David's failure as a father was his inability to address his own mistakes. Some scholars suggest that David may have been paralyzed by his past sins, particularly his own moral failings, such as his sin with Bathsheba. Perhaps due to his guilt, he hesitated to take decisive action against Amnon, fearing it would be hypocritical. This hesitation ultimately resulted in even more devastating consequences, as Absalom, Tamar's brother, sought revenge for his sister's abuse. David's story is a powerful reminder that leadership is not just about ruling others, but also about the responsibility to care for and protect those closest to us. His failure to act as a father when it mattered most shows how a lack of action, especially in moments of moral crisis, can lead to irreversible damage within a family. A king who could lead a nation failed to lead in his own home, leaving a legacy of pain and destruction that no amount of military victory could undo. David's failure to protect Tamar not only shattered her life, but also set off a series of events that deeply affected his entire family. The lack of justice and protection for Tamar led to one of the most destructive cycles of revenge and violence within the royal household. Absalom, Tamar's brother, was devastated by what had happened to his sister. The love and respect he had for his father, David, were eroded by the fact that David did nothing to address the crime that had been committed against Tamar. This emotional betrayal set Absalom on a path of revenge. As he watched his father remain silent and fail to act when he had the power to do so, Absalom's response to Tamar's abuse is a powerful example of how silence in the face of injustice can lead to catastrophic consequences. For 2 years, he said nothing about his feelings toward Amnon. Instead, he nurtured his anger in silence, and over time, it grew into a burning desire for revenge. Absalom, who had once been seen as a promising and charismatic son, was now consumed by his resentment. His silence, much like his father's, ultimately led to Amnon's death at the hands of Absalom's servants, as he carefully orchestrated his revenge during a sheep-shearing feast. The failure to confront issues within the family led to even further damage to David's kingdom. Absalom's act of vengeance set off a chain of events that destabilized the royal household and eventually led to Absalom's own rebellion against his father. David's inability to act as a father, to bring justice and protect his children, resulted in the complete breakdown of familial bonds, causing deep fractures that would never heal. Absalom, in his anger and grief, turned against his father, and his actions would have lasting, tragic consequences for Israel. This story teaches us that when we fail to address issues within our families, they don't just disappear, they fester and grow, often leading to greater harm. Absalom's revenge was not just a personal act, it was the culmination of years of unmet needs, unresolved conflicts, and the failure to communicate and protect those we love. It shows how silence in moments of injustice can lead to explosive consequences. What began as a father's failure to act in the face of wrongdoing snowballed into rebellion, betrayal, and death. The lesson here is clear. Silence, especially in the face of evil, can have a much greater cost than we realize. Had David confronted Amnon's actions when they first occurred, the subsequent violence and heartbreak could have been avoided. Instead, David's failure to protect his daughter and bring justice to his son set in motion a cycle of hurt and revenge that devastated his family and his kingdom. The story serves as a warning to all of us about the dangers of inaction and the importance of addressing issues promptly before they spiral out of control. David's failure to protect Tamar and address the deepening serves as a powerful lesson in leadership, not just within a kingdom, but also in the family unit. Despite his immense power and wisdom as a ruler, David's inability to safeguard his children from harm reflects a crucial oversight that had far-reaching consequences. The tragic events that followed, Tamar's abuse, Absalom's revenge, and the eventual rebellion against David demonstrate how failure in one area of leadership can destabilize not just personal relationships, but entire communities. The story also reveals how a leader's role extends beyond political and military power. True leadership involves cultivating healthy relationships and creating environments where those under one's care feel safe, heard, and protected. David's leadership on the battlefield and in the palace didn't translate into the type of care and responsibility that should have been present within his family. He may have conquered cities and defeated mighty enemies, but when it came to his own household, David fell short. His failure to protect Tamar and address the emotional and moral issues within his family ultimately tore apart the very structure he worked so hard to build. The implications of David's failure as a father can be seen in modern-day families as well. In today's world, many parents and leaders may find themselves overwhelmed with responsibilities, whether in their careers, relationships, or personal lives. However, like David, they may fail to recognize or address the pressing issues at home, thinking that they can manage everything. But the reality is that ignoring these issues, whether they are small conflicts or significant betrayals, often leads to bigger problems down the road. Just as David's silence led to a breakdown in his family and kingdom, neglecting family dynamics in real life can lead to emotional pain, fractured relationships, and even long-term damage in our own lives. Whether we are parents, leaders, or simply members of a community, the lessons from David's story urge us to be present and proactive in addressing issues before they grow beyond our control. Silence, when it comes to injustice or pain within our families, can be far more destructive than speaking up and taking action. Just as David's failure to act when Tamar was wronged set off a chain reaction of violence and grief, avoiding difficult conversations or neglecting responsibilities today can lead to lasting hurt. The key takeaway is clear. Leadership is not just about making decisions for the greater good. It's about the well-being of those closest to us. Taking action when needed, especially in times of family crisis, and maintaining open lines of communication can help prevent the escalation of issues. It is never too late to step up, protect, and lead with love and wisdom, just as we see in the lessons from David's life. Through this story, we learn that sometimes the most important battles we fight are not on the battlefield, but in the hearts of those we love most.